Many of these protests started peacefully with legitimate questions about the war. But in many cases, they lost the plot. The fear among Jews in this country is palpable right now.
CNN's Dana Bash aired one of the honestly most outrageous commentaries smearing unarmed anti-genocide protests on college campuses. That is what she did. She essentially labels them as Nazis. Here's more.
Protesting the way the Israeli government, the Israeli prime minister is prosecuting the retaliatory war against Hamas is one thing. Making Jewish students feel unsafe at their own schools is unacceptable, and it is happening way too much right now.
I'm a UCLA student. I deserve to go here. We pay tuition. This is our school, and they're not letting me walk in. My class is over there. I want to use that entrance. Well, I can't take it. Will you let me go in? This could be over in a second. Just let me and my friends go in.
Again, what you just saw is 2024 in Los Angeles, harkening back to the 1930s in Europe, and I do not say that lightly.
Now, blocking Jewish students is a terrible and inappropriate, immoral thing to do. However, there's some context missing.
Yeah, it's almost a brazen lie by Dana Bash, and she should correct that if she's a real journalist. They weren't letting anyone through. It wasn't just targeting Jewish students. If it was just targeting Jewish students, it is a very, very different situation. When they block everyone from going to that particular entrance, you could still be mad, but they're not targeting Jews because they're Nazis.
Right, and what was also missing from the context that was missing from her entire segment was the violence directed toward the pro-Palestinian protesters by the counter-protesters. And no case made that clearer than what happened on the campus of UCLA. In fact, take a look at this.
Mel Boer is a staff reporter for the Real News Network. She was at the Gaza Solidarity encampment Tuesday night when counter-protesters violently attacked it for several hours.
At UCLA in Los Angeles, a pro-Palestinian encampment came under attack overnight from counter-protesters using fireworks, leading to hours of fighting between the two groups.
Free Palestine!
The encampment in response raised their barricades. We know as well that the counter-protesters knocked over the metal barricades that the university has set up here.
Shanth Kodialam Nanganeri is a senior staff writer for the Daily Bruin, UCLA's student newspaper. They are one of the 4 reporters who were attacked.
We had all spent hours being out there on the field, reporting, sending messages to our editors, really scared about the scenes that we were seeing on campus towards the protesters in the encampment, the level of violence and vitriol that was in the air. I personally witnessed a counter-protester slam a wooden slab onto an individual who had her hands on the barricade of the encampment and smashing her fingers and listening to her scream.
A large number of counter-protesters showed up to campus at around 10:50. They began throwing fireworks at the encampment. They were throwing bird scooters as well at the encampment, other projectiles. We know that there was tear gas used by counter-protesters as well against the encampment, which for the most part has been peaceful since Thursday morning.
So you can take issue with occupying a building, you can take issue with the encampments, blocking students from being able to do their regular studying or access the library. Those are fine critiques and criticisms, but to completely omit the violence that was directed toward those pro-Palestinian protesters by counter-protesters, I don't know if it was intentional. I don't want to assume it was. But it makes her segment just wholly inaccurate.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you. Again, it's worse than inaccurate because it's kind of flipping the truth on its head, because she never condemned the violent attackers, which were on the pro-Israel side in this case. I think they were extremists, but they were on that side. Not only did she not condemn them, she didn't even mention them. She made it appear that there was violence against the pro-Israel side when the exact opposite happened.
And Jewish
Literally,
students overall.
Yeah, and not only that, it's not Jewish students overall. There were actually Jewish students within the pro-Palestine encampment.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. None of the facts matter. It's just overwhelming, not just propaganda, but demagoguery and fear-mongering. She called the peace protesters the equivalent of Nazis. So the violent people, wonderful or don't even exist. The peace protesters, Nazis. It's beyond the pale. And so by the way, we're gonna tell you in a little bit about a law that the House has already passed where it was going to be illegal to call anything related to Israel Nazis. But if you protest Israel, you could be called Nazis all day long on national television without any evidence by CNN. There's no correction, no nothing. It's just gonna stand.
I do want to go to one other portion of her segment where she talks about something that she feels has been completely ignored or neglected by the demonstrators.
Many of these protests started peacefully with legitimate questions about the war, but in many cases, they lost the plot. They're calling for a ceasefire. Well, there was a ceasefire on October 6th, the day before Hamas terrorists brutally murdered more than 1,000 people inside Israel and took hundreds more as hostages. This hour, I'll speak to an American-Israeli family whose son is still held captive by Hamas since that horrifying day that brought us to this moment. You don't hear the pro-Palestinian protesters talking about that. We will.
You know what else I don't hear? I don't hear you on CNN. I don't hear Dana Bash on CNN talking about how the aerial bombardments and the siege of the Gaza Strip is not only impacting the Palestinian civilians, which clearly who cares, they don't matter, right? But the precious hostages that they keep pretending they care so deeply about. If you genuinely are concerned about the hostages, you would maybe, I don't know, be a little more vociferous in your opposition to the IDF's aerial bombardment of that region, or the fact that they continue to block essential humanitarian aid. You think it only impacts the Palestinians? Could it be possible that it's also impacting the hostages? We don't even know how many of them are alive. The IDF, it's been confirmed, has killed 3 of them. 3 of them as they were shirtless, begging for help after escaping their captors. I mean, the thing is, what's happening to those hostages and what happened to those hostages is awful. But it's just so strange to me that they don't seem to connect the dots. If you're worried about the hostages, you would want the bombing to stop. And guess what the pro-Palestinian protesters want? They want the bombing to stop. That is what they want. Okay, yeah. They are literally on these campuses asking, demanding for the war to end. And they're using whatever leverage they think they have through divestment in military contractors, Israeli defense companies, things like that. They're using that as a way of trying to end this war.
Yeah, so CNN pretends to be objective, but did you just hear what she said? She used the Israeli talking point about, there was a ceasefire on October 6th. Now, wait a minute, October 7th was terrible, and you want to blame Hamas for starting this particular round of conflict? No problem. And is that under the umbrella of objective? I would say it is, and I've done the same thing. I blame Hamas for what happened on October 7th, and it's terrible. But how is that connected to this? We're 6 months in now. So Hamas killed around 1,200 people, about 860 civilians or so. Now Israel has killed 34,000 people at a bare minimum, and 25,000 women and children. So if they had killed, let's say, 250,000 women and children, you could still say, well, there was a ceasefire on October 6th. Since Hamas didn't listen to the ceasefire on October 6th, well, that's the people of Gaza had it coming. But wait, the people of Gaza aren't Hamas. Who cares? 25,000 dead, 250,000 dead, 2.5 million dead. Doesn't matter, there was a ceasefire on October 6th. Okay, so that's you can see why that's wrong and has nothing to do with, yes, but should we stop bombing today, right? After 34,000 are dead and 1 million are starving. But secondly, was there a ceasefire? Because 57 years of occupation. So I think what Hamas did was outrageous. But they make it appear like, what? Israel was just sitting there, and all of a sudden Norway attacked.
Yeah, like it's a total one-sided war. But look, one final thing I'll say is, she's at CNN. her own colleague, Jeremy Diamond, who actually has done some fantastic reports.
I was just about to go there, yeah.
Recently reported a story, this was about 2 weeks ago. He reported on a story regarding a deadly strike in Gaza that killed multiple civilians, including at the time, 8 children. Well, that number of children who have died has gone up to 10, with the 11th in critical condition. The IDF at the time refused to take responsibility for that attack, despite CNN providing the IDF with the coordinates and time of the attack, saying that they carried out a strike at a different time than described, and that the collateral damage as described is not known to the IDF. So there was further investigation into it, and that further investigation confirmed that the IDF did in fact carry out the airstrike. And so does she have anything to say about that? Because while it is true, you should be concerned about the hostages. I wish the Israeli government was a little more concerned about the hostages. I mean, you want to talk about a ceasefire. I mean, in the beginning of the week, there's a story about how they're working on a ceasefire in Cairo. They're really hoping that Hamas accepts the ceasefire. They're really hoping, right? At the same time, you have Benjamin Netanyahu saying, whether we come to a ceasefire agreement or not, I'm invading Rafa, the border town in Gaza that more than 1 million displaced Palestinians are currently sheltering in. So who exactly is acting in bad faith here in regard to a ceasefire? Because if you come to an agreement on a ceasefire and then Netanyahu proceeds to do a ground invasion into Rafa, well, that breaks the ceasefire. That shows that he doesn't actually care about a ceasefire. He doesn't plan on following a ceasefire. Was that reported by CNN? Is Dana Bash concerned about that?
Yeah, guys, look, we're fair. I think Jeremy Diamond and Clarissa Ward have done some terrific pieces for CNN.
Christiane Amanpour, another one.
Yeah, and by the way, at times, Dana Bash herself and Jake Tapper have held Israeli officials to account in a way that I thought was really pretty good journalism. That's why this piece was so unsettling in how ridiculous and biased and over the top it was. I mean, she comes in with all of the information, in my opinion, not my opinion, we just explained it to you with stone cold facts. It was definitely wrong, not giving the context that they were blocking all the students, not the Jewish students, et cetera, just outrageous, right? And then she had the audacity to say that the fear is palpable among Jewish Americans. Yes, because Dana, you created it. You created this fear-mongering about how they're targeting the Jews. Oh my God, they're about to do X, Y, and Z, et cetera. When that's not the case at all. And I mean, think about it this way. Could she have done that same exact segment saying the pro-Israel protesters are targeting Muslims and friends of Muslims and peace protesters, and look at these outrage, and they're beating people with sticks, etc. She could have done a giant story about how awful that violent attack from the pro-Israel side was, and then ask, does this look like 1930s in Germany? Now, I would have said, hey, don't do that. That's too much. They don't represent everybody on the pro-Israel side, and no, calling them Nazis is not a good idea. But instead, you called the peaceful UCLA students Nazis.
Yep.
And that's perfectly acceptable on CNN.
I got 2 hours of sleep last night because I sat watching the live stream, the local news live stream of UCLA. It is shocking how hard those students work to avoid taking the bait by the counter protesters to get violent.
Yeah.
And things got violent once the cops showed up and started dismantling the encampment.
Yeah, I know that from Colombia, that the protesters were so careful not to do anything violent because what they didn't want was to feed into the mainstream media fear-mongering about how Palestinians are violent.
Exactly.
And so they went through extra pains to not do that. Yes, again, people not associated with Colombia yelled terrible things outside of Colombia, okay? But the students themselves are aware of the situation. Not only do they not want to do that to their fellow Jewish students. Remember, a lot of the protesters are Jewish themselves, right? But on top of that, they don't want to help mainstream media smear Palestinians.
Right.
But facts are irrelevant. Mainstream media is going to smear them. Even if you're the victims of the crime, you're going to get called a Nazi.
Yeah. And KTLA 5, do better. Find a better on the ground reporter, because that guy is so deeply biased and thirsty for violence against those protesters.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.